I think I might have just pulled this off.
Really?
We blowing up the whole thing. Everybody in the bouncy house going bouncy.
Tom and Jerry is directed by Tim Story, who directed the 2005 Fantastic Four film, as well as written by the guy who made Brigsby Bear. What an odd combination this is. Tom and Jerry is an adaptation of the original cartoon of the same name from Hanna-Barbera, and follows Tom and Jerry as they make their way into New York City. Both of them are searching for a new place to live, and they come across a swanky hotel. Jerry finds it first and causes some ruckus, which causes Tom the cat to be recruited to try to get rid of Jerry the mouse. And also the fact that there's also supposed to be a wedding of some sort, and they have to try to make sure that things don't go awry in order to, make things happen. Honestly, Tom and Jerry is one of those rare movies that I could just say it's kind of passable. It's not a movie that I would consider a great movie, but it's certainly a step above the other sort of animation into real world type of stuff. And I want to talk about that for a second. We've had films like The Smurfs, where you had this magical portal that opens up and somehow these magical creatures that's from an animated world get sucked into our world, and there's this whole fish out of water thing. And this movie really delineates from that in the respect that the world itself has a hybrid of animation and live action. All the animals in this movie are animated. Every single one. From the birds, to the horses, to the dogs, to the cats, to pretty much everything. All the animals in this movie are animated. Now, it's not necessarily 2D or even 3D. It's a mixture of both. What I would consider to be a, quote, 2.5D style of CG animation, where you have these simple lines of a 2D animated sketch mixed with the 3D body that you would find in Blender. And that's pretty much the whole movie. It's that. I really like that. And I love how that in of itself is a delineation of a lot of other, like, here's an animated character that comes to our real world sort of aesthetic. Like, you compare Tom and Jerry to the Smurfs, and it's completely different in terms of how they present the characters themselves, which I find to be the most refreshing. Now, the cool thing about Tom and Jerry is that unlike its original film thing that it had all the way back in the 80s and 90s where Tom and Jerry talked, in this movie they keep it to its original premise, that the cat and mouse do not talk, and a lot of the comedy that ensues is slapstick. And there is some pretty good slapstick in this movie. There's some really great scenes where Tom and Jerry chase each other, and there's a lot of scenes where, people get hit with frying pans or even a hot iron or get electrocuted by lightning. All this stuff that I just mentioned is pretty much about 35% of the movie. Because what this movie really is about is Chloe Grace Moretz's character, which I don't really remember the name of. She has to go get a job at this swanky hotel that Tom and Jerry just so happen to be a part of. And, she's trying to keep a low profile, and she's trying to do all these things, and she's trying to make sure this whole historic wedding goes off without a hitch, and there's this whole subplot with her having to help the bride, trying to find a ring, and so many other things. And really, this movie isn't about Tom and Jerry. It's about this person and the other hotel people that are trying to keep this whole thing alive. Now, I will say, the acting in this whole thing is pretty good from the other actors. Chloe Grace Moretz is pretty okay. And then you have Michael Pena, who plays one of the hotel staff, who's very kind of suspicious of Chloe Grace Moretz and what's going on at the hotel, and he does a pretty good job as well. But I'd say mostly the most disappointing part about Tom and Jerry is that this really isn't a Tom and Jerry movie. It's about Tom and Jerry plus these other human characters, and that's not necessarily fun. It's not a Tom and Jerry movie, it's a Tom and Jerry plus these guys, and overall it's just kind of like, well, why'd you call it Tom and Jerry in the first place? But again, while I really did like the movie in terms of its animation, the fact that it returns to a basic formula for Tom and Jerry themselves, and all these other things, I think the worst part about this is that the story is just kind of meh. Now again, like, Tom and Jerry isn't like this highbrow, high art thing that has the most complex of storylines. It's just a cat and a mouse that fight each other. And if you're looking for that, it does have it in this movie in spades. But if you're willing to sit through the stuff about the hotel and the wedding and all that, then you're pretty much in for a decent ride for the most part. But for the other parts, not so much. If you're not really into going through the whole parts with the hotel stuff and just want to focus on the Tom and Jerry stuff, that really only comprises about 15 minutes of this hour and 45-minute long film. So, I don't know. It's pretty fun. You can still watch it. It's on HBO Max right now. And, yeah, that's all I really have to say. Oh, and one more thing. The comedy also is a little bit hit or miss. Slapstick aside, I really like the slapstick. Most of the other bits of humor is self-referential humor from Warner Brothers, and this is a trend that I really don't appreciate from Warner Brothers and Disney, is that they'll make references or poke fun at their own previous properties, and I just can't really get behind that. It's just like, I don't know, it's like a dad trying to be cool to you, you know? It's like your dad trying to floss for Fortnite, or some other thing, some other stupid thing that's in with the kids, and right now it's self-deprecating humor, and there's bits and pieces about it. In fact, this shot right here, I took a picture of last night and tweeted about on Twitter, and there's plenty more like this in this movie, and I just can't really get behind this type of humor. It's just not for me. But all in all, Tom and Jerry is a perfectly fine animated / live action hybrid film that keeps with the traditions of Tom and Jerry, only if you're willing to sit through the whole wedding bit. But I will say the slapstick that they involve in those scenes are actually pretty fun to watch too. It does buck the trends of all the previous family films before, and pretty much makes its own thing, and it's fine. I think Tom and Jerry is a fine film, nothing to write home about, so I'm going to give Tom and Jerry a C+. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of Tom and Jerry. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've seen it, write your comments down below of what you thought about the film. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.